So this session is, if we were on the Ethereum roadmap, this would be the purge. This is the session where we face some hard truths about what's going on, what people actually think about NFTs across different areas. I'll be talking about artists. Chris is going to be talking about developers, and John's going to be talking about the kind of investment community and maybe everybody else. So we'll get straight into it. So I'm Ellie, Rennie. I'm a professor at RMIT University in the Blockchain Innovation Hub, and I'm going to let my two panelists introduce themselves.
Thank you. So my name's Chris. I am the CEO and co-founder of Verida. Verida is if you don't know about what we're doing, is a decentralized database storage infrastructure for web3. It's a bit like IPFS, but brings actual database, a bit like a MongoDB that's decentralized. And we offer a bunch of tooling for developers to enhance their Web3 applications for new interesting use cases.
John.
And I'm John. I'm a partner at AirTree Ventures. We're a large Australian-based venture fund. We've got 1.3 billion under management, of which 50 million is dedicated to seed-stage crypto investments. And as far as, I guess, NFT-relevant investments are concerned, we're large investors in both Immutable and Alt-State Machine, who I think both spoke yesterday.
Cool. All right, I'm going to start with a quote. This is from a composer, male, 30 to 39 years old. Blockchain is inherently evil and based on junk libertarian ideology. It has no place in art, and I will not only never use anything connected to it, but will do everything in my power to discourage its use and discredit those who promote it. All right, so this was a response to a survey that we put out. This was work we did for the Australia Council for the Arts. It's currently available up on their website on the research page. It's a bit of a beast of a report, 40,000 words, broken into different sections. I had some co-authors, including Ilana Kushner, who you might have heard on another panel, helped me write a chapter on the kind of legal questions that artists need to be thinking about. But the bit that I was, I suppose, surprised by in the research was the polarisation among artists towards Web3 and NFTs. So this was nowhere near a representative survey. Don't take this as how artists in general feel. It's more an insight into people who just answered the survey, basically. But of 110 valid responses, almost 80 weren't using blockchain, and over half of them said that they would never use blockchain. And what was kind of striking was we asked them why they wouldn't use it. And the options that they had were things like ethical stance based on environmental impact, don't know how, ideological stance based on economic model, can't see a business case, blah, 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 those kinds of things. It's not relevant to my artistic practice was another one, right? In the responses, a number of people actually, we didn't give an all of the above category, but a number of people took the other box and wrote all of the above. So that's what kind of made me think that maybe what we're looking at here is a different kind of adoption curve. I used to spend a lot of time looking at internet adoption, and we all know, we're all kind of familiar with the bell curve, that it's early adopters, then kind of more people get involved, mainstream, etc., eventually catches up. Maybe that's not what we're looking at here. Maybe this is more like filter bubbles. Maybe the kind of way that we will end up is that some people will be in Web3 and experiencing opportunities from that, and others will never go near it. And maybe that's okay. So these are some of the things that we want to talk about today. I would say, though, that from my perspective, one of the reasons why this matters is a lot of artists have experienced extreme hate speech, because of their decision to use Web3 and NFTs. And that is absolutely not on and not acceptable. And we heard stories of people who were experiencing that. And I think it was super interesting listening to the artist panel yesterday, and it was and their kind of delight at Tezos, seeing it as the punk chain for artists. And of course, artists went there because of the green NFTs movement, and particular Discord channels that were spaces where artists could express their concern around Ethereum at the time, using proof of work and the energy use associated with that. So why this matters is it can actually change who goes where and what chains survive and probably what products. So let's start with you, Chris. Like, how do you see this in terms of being someone who's developing out products, and what's the attitudes among developers to Web3?
Yeah, so I guess I know that we're in a little bit of a bubble at least in the world I interact with, because it's predominantly Web3 kind of developers that have already, I guess, committed to being in this space. But one anecdote I guess I can share is, being on Twitter, and every now and again, suddenly you realize you're in a conversation with somebody that's totally coming from a position of hate against this whole sort of Web3 and crypto space. And they might be an engineer at a large tech company. And so you realize that A, you're in a bubble, but B, there is, a lot of misunderstanding sometimes about how the technology actually works. And, the angle around, energy usage and green blockchains has been a polarizing issue, and something that the mainstream media has definitely picked up on, and I think fueled some of the hate more broadly against some of the blockchain technologies. And so you see some of that come out in conversations where, I guess, you think if somebody sort of went a bit deeper into understanding the technology, then perhaps they'd have a different opinion. And so I think that media role is really interesting, that, when people in the fast-paced world that we have today is rapidly consuming information, we tend to not necessarily go into all the detail. We kind of, skim and sort of base our opinion based on the bubble that we're all living in this new sort of, user-owned, sort of user-determined media. We all determine what we read these days. We can access Twitter, we can access, all sorts of different social media platforms. We don't just get our news from the television that we used to. So perhaps, going back to your point of the internet adoption curve may be different from this sort of blockchain crypto adoption curve. Maybe there's an argument to be made there that's because back when the internet was just beginning, we consumed information in a very different way. It was through newspapers, it was through television networks, and there was a much more consistent kind of messaging. It wasn't everybody sort of having their own opinion, and then us sort of perhaps getting lost or confused around all of that different messaging. So it's probably a different environment that we're actually in now.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I read a paper recently which was saying it's not so much about filter bubbles where we're not exposed to other information. It's just that things that we are interested in or believe kind of get reinforced by the things that come across our social medias. But over to you, John. What are your thoughts on all of this?
I think the media point is an interesting one, right? So at AirTree, we're investors in the internet and software and the future of those things. And we see blockchain as a part of that, and that's why a part of our fund is going towards that. But for us, it's really just an open database on which people build things. And I think the thing that's different is the media coverage and the kind of, tribalism that has emerged around crypto that you just don't get in other technology sectors. Like the debate between, someone moving from a SQL database to another type of database doesn't make the front page of the New York Times in the way that everything in crypto seems to. And this is no doubt because of tokenization. It's no doubt because of the grift that comes of that and sort of the economic consequences of that. And so I think PR for crypto is much more important, and getting ahead of that message or getting sort of a voice around that message is much more important because, and I think we'll get to this, the adoption isn't there yet, right? And so we're getting orders of magnitude more coverage for an early stage technological innovation than almost anything else in software. And outside of climate change, I can't think of other things that are sort of this divisive, and certainly not in technology. So I think there's a real challenge there, because if we all want to be decentralized and not kind of convened, in order to get a message that will onboard the normies, beyond the sort of 3 people who actually use crypto in the world, you need some kind of consistent messaging to sort of reel back the damage that's been done.
Yeah, and how do we do that? I mean, you were an early investor in CoinDesk, which is absolutely probably the most reputable news source out there on crypto. I certainly read it, and their breaking story around FTT and FTX was extraordinary, and what's occurred since then. So, I mean, there's something around ensuring good media in this, obviously, but how does that get beyond that? I mean, I recently just made a decision not to talk to the mainstream media, except as background. You know, I'm an educator. I'll talk to journalists for as long as they like to give them information that they need to write their story well. But unless I know what angle they're going to push, I don't want to be part of it anymore. And I don't know if anyone saw the Four Corners story, which I unfortunately appeared on. That was the decisive moment for me. And so I think that, but then if we don't kind of engage with the broader public, then we're not really shifting anything either.
I mean, I think the best way to engage is to get actual use cases, right? Like, there's, 3 million people have touched Uniswap ever. Broader DeFi is even smaller than that. I think the biggest NFT platform is Top Shot, but that's fallen off a cliff, and so actual NFT usage on OpenSea is tiny. And so, like, don't get me wrong, like, I'm investing in this for 10 years, like, we're fully committed to this, but the best way to get positive coverage is to get actual consumer usage and get away from sort of token games around things that go up and down, and get into people playing games because they're fun, or people using open finance because it's a better product. And so we're in this annoying, awkward sort of pimply teenager phase where a lot of the infrastructure that people like Chris are building is kind of almost there and almost ready for mainstream adoption, but we still don't have the breakout use case, and I think that's what changes everything.
And just to expand on that, I think if you were to look at the crypto space, the number one use case is speculation at the moment. And the reality is that a centralized exchange or centralized platform, you know, is faster than the decentralized alternatives. It has more optionality with order types and things like that. So centralized exchanges have sort of become the, you know, for new people to crypto is sort of where they kind of go to sort of learn about this space. And so when we do have these large sort of blow-ups of different centralized players in the space, you know, there is, I guess, an argument to be made there that the media and people looking in this space do have a good argument to say, hey, look, things aren't actually right here. The irony there is that the decentralized technology that helped actually expose some of those underlying issues with those centralized platforms. But I think that because the adoption, you know, isn't there, but the key sort of use case is speculation, we really have to break out of that speculative kind of environment and get these use cases happening before we can kind of really move forward and really show the world, you know, the true potential that exists here. Because, you know, people that are in this room, they understand the potential, but we're still kind of getting to that point.
I always have an issue with this word or term, use cases. I think it's a really corporate way of thinking about the world, guys. What's been fascinating about NFTs in relation to the art world in particular, and the art world very broadly defined, which is what's been fascinating about it, that digital artists or street artists suddenly have a means to ownership or to create buyers that they wouldn't otherwise be able to. So for me, creatives, they don't think in terms of use cases. They go out there and they do creative innovation, and it's bottom up, and it just kind of arises. And NFTs. It's not really about. When I was writing this report, I was thinking, this is not really about what artists are doing with Web3. It's what artists have done to Web3, because it wouldn't be what it is without the whole NFT movement and the innovation that we're now seeing in terms of that. But I definitely take your point, I think, around games. Games is a really, it's an area where NFTs in particular just make so much sense, and yet the hate among the gaming community is just, it's so intense. Anyone got thoughts on games? You were also involved in Immutable X, right?
Yeah. So we've invested in Immutable and Alter State Machine. I think the problem with crypto games to date is that they just haven't been very good. So like the fact that Axie Infinity ended up with Filipino like groups of people in factories in the Philippines farming tokens speaks to not the gameplay and not the desirability to like enjoy that. It just speaks to the sort of economic consequences. So we need to move past that phase of crypto gaming where people can get rich from playing early into people playing games because they're fun and like the tokenomics being like irrelevant to that experience and perhaps not even realizing that the tokenomics are there. And that's the future that Immutable is trying to power. They're trying to bring web2 gaming companies and just general game development shops onto the blockchain and give them a seamless, gas-free, transaction cost-free experience. That should be a big opportunity. Like gaming is a $180 billion market annual revenues, and just to level set that, the recorded music industry is $26 billion, so it's like 7-8 times the size, of which 112, I think at last count, is in-game economy. So this is like Fortnite, Minecraft, you pick your game, it's people buying $7 billion worth of skins in Fortnite annually. So like all of that makes sense, but it turns out that to build a AAA game takes 24 to 36 months and a shitload of expertise. And to date, as you say, the legacy gaming companies are poo-pooing NFTs, which makes sense. There's an innovator's dilemma there. Like their business models are selling things to their own users and having an internal marketplace. So like opening up that walled garden isn't in their interest, in the same way that for social media companies, having a decentralized social experience where you take your data with you is not in their experience because it breaks the business model. So you need AAA games to emerge from like the ground up and be crypto native at the beginning, because you need to disrupt the legacy players, because they're like the AAAs are unlikely to adopt it before you get a break-in. And so I'm conscious that Kieran is speaking next door on this topic, but that's what you need. Like you need something like an Illuvium or a game that's starting from scratch to be usable and playable, and that's going to take time.
Just to go to your point about use cases, I think there's two parts to use cases in a way. So if you look at use cases as more broadly as sort of, I guess, a more technical term from my perspective of, hey, there's all these different things across different industries that kind of add value. So that could be artists being able to own their music and being able to get royalties, how that, in terms of better ownership there, or it could be gaming, having assets that can be, shared across different games as, examples of that. But I think there is often a misunderstanding between a use case, like a use case that's helpful for the individual, so an artist or a gamer, versus a use case for the underlying crypto or blockchain technology. And so you sometimes get a misalignment there, I think. And so that was actually mentioned yesterday around, projects that, get all this large community that are interested in a token for a game, but then when the game launches, they're actually not interested in playing the game. They're just there for the token. And so it's like the token is the use case for the blockchain and providing utility to that speculator space, but it's actually the game itself is actually providing utility to the actual audience that's intended. So I think it's sort of an interesting call out that use case can be kind of misinterpreted or misunderstood depending on where you're coming from in this space. It
feels like one of the really unsettled things that we're facing right now is this idea of people having a stake in the protocols and applications that they use, which is a really important aspect of crypto, that we're in there, we can be governors, we can be involved, we can deliberate, all of these things. We might even get some financial return from things that do well, et cetera, et cetera. And then this kind of what you're talking about, which is the kind of background infrastructure aspect of it, which also needs to do well. It just needs to kind of run and things get built on it, right? And one of those is causing the other one to suffer in terms of public image, which is the having a stake and speculation. Is speculation our problem? And I suppose this kind of does come back to the events of recent weeks around FTX, Alameda, etc. And I mean, where are we left now as a result of this kind of one of the biggest grifts in history?
Well, just on the speculation side, I'd argue that you've got, I guess, projects that are going to have that are genuine projects that are trying to do something, for with a vision and a star that everyone can kind of align with, and then you've got others that are more speculative, very spun up. And if you look at FTX, there was obviously a lot of activity going on the Solana blockchain that was all about just sort of spinning up projects and getting tokens, and that's a very different sort of story. But if you have a concept and you've got a vision and you get a community that buys into that, a token is a really good way to sort of seed some of the economic value to kind of make that happen and create that. So I think that token concept is really a powerful one, but it's obviously, as with most things, it can easily be exploited and misused for nefarious sort of purposes.
John?
I mean, I think that's still playing out, to be honest. Like, at the infrastructure layer, that's true. Like, that worked for Ethereum. That has worked for some other infrastructure level things that they've generated enough developer interest who are building. At the application layer, I think it's still hard to point to the token model being a standout success, and I think that's the experiment we run through this bear market and find out what happens there. But I think, I just sort of repeat myself, to be really successful, the token needs to become irrelevant. Like the other things we value, whether it be digital ownership, whether it be data sovereignty, whether it be like the other benefits that crypto brings, those things need to be valuable enough in and of themselves outside of token speculation for the industry to become huge, like to become internet scale.
Where does that leave VCs?
I think
looking for companies that actually bring in revenue.
Leaves us in the same place as the rest of the internet, right? Like the application has to get users, who have to get value from that application.
Right. Okay. I don't know how I feel about that. All right. And look, I think I've just got one other point here, I suppose, which is really around the. I think it's okay if people stay away as well. Like, I don't know where you guys sit with that, but certainly when it comes to artists, I think if you want to do pottery in your garage and there's the value that you see in your art practice is in that activity, creativity for creativity's sake is actually okay as well. So how do you feel about the idea that maybe there will be two internets or two games industries?
But well, I don't know about that. Like the artist making pottery in their garage, like fine. Like crypto doesn't have to touch all artists. That doesn't mean it's a failure. Like artists as a general category, I'm sure there are cohorts of artists that dislike lots of different things. But if I think crypto has been a success, albeit with speculation games for specific types of art already. Like generative art was a thing before crypto, has massively benefited from digital provenance, from distribution, from disintermediation, and I think that will continue. So, like, I know that you've done a very extensive survey which says that some artists hate crypto, but that doesn't mean that crypto is a failure for art in my eyes. If it solves a portion of distribution and disintermediation and digital ownership for a portion of artists, then that's great. And I think that's true of like lots of categories. Like it doesn't need to win for everybody.
I actually agree with that. I mean, the kind of fascinating things that we're seeing as a result of Web3 are, I think Yancey Strickler calls them release clubs, the meta label concept and just what the new capabilities that people have as a result, the ability to redesign the cultural economy in the way that they want it to be is super important. And I think those that aren't really interested in building new cultural economies might still benefit down the line from them anyway, just by virtue of who's left standing.
There's an adoption story here too, obviously. Like, if you were to think of Bitcoin, Ethereum as sort of foundational infrastructure and technology that's now enabling applications to be built, sort of 5-10 years later, you could draw an analogy of the internet where we had TCP/IP and a whole bunch of other sort of foundational technologies that led to kind of the early search engines and things like that. And then now we've had Web 1, Web 2, and we're sort of talking about Web 3. The scale of everyone having the internet on their phone now is obviously phenomenal compared to say 2000, where it was on these sort of slow, clunky computers. So now we think of like the internet as everyone has it and everyone understands it and it's just a part of their life. But we are still kind of early in people understanding and having it ingrained into all of their everyday lives. And so I think there's the challenge sort of there is we now need to bring the applications and the use case. We need to bring the new Googles, the new Facebooks, the new Twitters, the new Apples into this space, and we don't know what that looks like. That's why it's Web3. We're still kind of learning and working that out, and that's the challenge that we all have in this room.
I also think I'm going to sound like a cranky boomer, I apologise, but I think there's a bunch of naivety in like Web3 building community. Like I think tokens are a lazy go-to-market. And the number of projects and protocols and companies that I've spoken to who are releasing like some kind of NFT ticketing solution or a new game or like some kind of access solution with NFTs. And I'm like, all right, well, how are you going to get this to market? And the answer is, oh, well, we've released a token. That's going to economically incentivize people to use this thing. Like, maybe that'll work, but, you know, we've got 50 years of building sales and go-to-market organizations from bottom-up SaaS like Atlassian right through to heavy enterprise sales at, you know, you pick your company. Like, there is a proven track for taking internet companies to market, and I think tokens are an interesting innovation that can improve and get virality and build community and do a lot of great things. But I feel like most projects I meet are like, all right, great, well, that's all we need. And I'm pretty sure there's like the successful projects will have a hybrid of what has worked and a new model. So that's my rant about crypto builders.
You heard it first here, people. Token fatigue is real. I think that's such an interesting idea. I say this as someone who would love to invest in all of your tokens and will continue to do so, but just don't think that solves your go-to-market. I think that's super interesting, and we have a lot to think about around how we create value if it's not through just, ERC20s over and over again. So I think we're actually at time, but any final thoughts? Or was that the final thought from you, John? Just end on abusing every entrepreneur in the room. I mean, like, it's all positive, right? Like, it's almost undeniable that decentralization is a part of the internet. I think it's just navigating a pretty wonky path there that's full of, unfortunately at the moment, full of fraud and full of grift. And it's incumbent upon, like, those people who are in this room in the middle of a bear market are clearly the type of people that are going to build consumer-type solutions that people will use. Once we have a few breakouts, I think it's game back on, but it's going to be an uncomfortable 6 to 18 months with a bunch of bad news headlines and a macroeconomy that's not willing us forward. Any final thoughts?
Look, my only comment really is to sort of reiterate that. I think everyone in this room is obviously, a believer in this space, and there's so much opportunity out there if you dig under the hood. So I really encourage everyone to kind of weather the storm that we're sort of in the middle of and come out of this a lot stronger.
I'm going to actually end with another quote, which was Black Swan from yesterday's panel, where Black Swan said, "No one gave a shit about me before NFTs." And I just think that's incredibly valuable. If we're connecting artists with new audiences and buyers, importantly, then we've got to keep going. And that's going to create a hell of a lot of hurt because these audiences are not necessarily the ones that they're used to dealing with. But let's just keep going. Thanks, guys.